In the mid-90s, Fiat came out with the Punto, and at the time it was quite an interesting car. It was something new, something different, and it was generally a big hit for Fiat. But after that, not a lot happened really. The next one or two revisions weren't particularly inspiring. And then came along the Grande Punto. When the Grande Punto came out, Fiat was going through a bit of a rough patch financially, and it certainly did help them, although the real saviour for Fiat was the Fiat 500. For its time, the Grande Punto was actually a pretty stylish car. I do like the way that it nicely looks sporty, but it doesn't look too childish. They haven't gone to too much effort in sticking too many plastic parts on. The Grande Punto was designed by some guy called yeah. He's Italian and it sounds good, so it must be a good deal. It's also the same guy who designed the Maserati Spider, and you can tell when you look at the wing mirrors and the fingernail front headlights, you can tell it's definitely the same guy. And I think he's done a very good job. Like I say, I like the way the car looks fairly sporty without being too immature. I also like the way that the wheels and tyres nicely fill out the arches rather than looking like you've got scooter wheels on it like some small cars do. And when you look at the front, you can certainly see the Maserati styling in the headlamps, but I also like the way that the whole car just sweeps straight up with no real interruption. And there's a couple of little points on the car which remind you that it's Italian and it was really designed for looking good and has no function at all whatsoever. Little features like the washer jets. We see 3 nodules for the washer jets. This middle one is actually blanked off. There's nothing in there. It's purely to make it look nice. Another Italian design flair which I quite like is the fact that they've made these little quarter windows here in the front, which when you're sitting inside are completely and utterly pointless. You cannot see out of them and they add nothing to driving the car, but it's just a nice use of space. Again, typically Italian. One thing I do like is the way that they've managed to keep the whole rear of the car fairly smooth and uninterrupted, and they've done so by doing away with a handle to get into the boot, and it looks rather nice. I do like it. The only downside is, however, you can't get into the boot. You'd expect maybe this button pushes, but no, it's just decoration. There's no buttons around here. I can't get in. The only way you can get in is if you're in the front already to open it, or you use the button on the keys. But once you get into the boot, eventually, it's a reasonable space, and it's actually one of the largest in its class. It's quite a usable space, and when you put the back seats down, even more usable. Slight problem with this boot though is that the boot lip is actually quite high, so there is quite a drop into the bottom of the boot. So if you have got any heavy shopping that you want to get out, this may not be the right car for you. Historically, the build quality of Fiat has never been particularly impressive, and that's normally the case with most Italian manufacturers. However, the Grande Punto is a little bit of an exception, and just a good indication. There's a nice thunk when you close the doors. Typically they'd be quite rattly. So, on the inside of the car, nothing particularly special about it. It's as you'd expect from a typical hatchback, but I do like the way that Fiat tends to decorate the inside of their cars like they decorate the outside of their cars. I like the way they've got this nice blue trim here, in this case going around the centre console, which nicely matches the seat. And this is something that Fiat tends to do a lot now, and you'll see it especially on the Fiat 500. The seats possibly a little bit hard, and they don't tend to hug you very much when you're going around corners. All the controls and centre console with an easy reach, nice chunky buttons and dials, nice and easy to use. Nothing particularly special there. We've got leather steering wheel, leather gear knob, no leather handbrake. Something Fiat are also quite good at is little cubby holes and storage in their small cars, because they are small cars and obviously storage comes at a price. So you've got various cup holders and little cubby holes and little trays down here, another cup holder here, coin slots here. There's another little cubby hole down here next to the driver's leg. You've got a reasonable size glove box. You've also got the door pockets, but they are a little bit on the small side. They are actually quite slim. You probably won't get a can of de-icer or anything in there. For those of you with sat-nav, something worth bearing in mind is actually the cigarette socket is currently behind the gear stick, which is all very well and good if you're just lighting a cigarette, but if you do want to plug your sat-nav in, you will have the cable trailing past the gear stick over the centre console and potentially hitting the indicators and gear stick, which obviously isn't a very good idea. In terms of comfort inside, sitting in here, I'm 6'2", and actually I've got plenty of headroom. The steering wheel probably could do with being a little bit closer for my liking, but this is probably about right. It has got reach and rake. The seat goes forwards and backwards quite far. Additionally, you've also got height adjustment, which is something you don't find very often in some small cars, which is also a very handy feature. Electric door mirrors come as standard on the Grande Punto, as do front electric windows, but the rear windows are keep fit windows. Additionally, on the dash you've got the electronic boot release, which we talked about earlier, and you've also got the city button, which is a very handy feature for when you're doing low speed driving and parking, which I can quickly demonstrate now actually. Turn the car on. So with the city button off, generally I'm going to have to use my hand to turn the wheel. There is a fair amount of resistance. We push the city button, comes up with city on the dashboard, and now I can turn it with my pinky nice and easily. But it's worth bearing in mind it only actually works below 15 miles per hour, which is fine because you wouldn't want the steering to be this light above 15 miles an hour. So, initial impressions of the car, driving it along here, doing a nice steady 40 miles an hour at the moment, is it's actually pretty quiet, it's pretty composed. It's a fairly soft ride, it's not too harsh. The steering is a little bit woolly in the middle, but at lower speeds it's not too bad. In terms of power, the engine we've actually got here in this Grande Punto is a 1.3 litre turbo diesel, producing 90 brake horsepower. There was actually two versions. There's another one that's 75 brake horsepower, but if you can, get the 90 brake horsepower one. The 90 brake horsepower one is only just powerful enough for this. Really, it could have done with being a bit bigger. It does have quite a delay on the turbo. You'd expect a delay, but this is just a little bit too much, and it does feel like the car's a little bit too heavy for us sometimes, so I can only imagine that the 75 horsepower version is going to be much worse. It does feel like this engine should be in a city car, something much smaller for the size of the engine, but you can get by on this. So when it comes to pulling away at junctions, it can be a little bit underpowered. Put your foot down, bogs down, and all of a sudden it dumps all the power in one go when the turbo's finished spooling up, which can be very frustrating. You get this sudden surge of power that throws you back in your seat, and it's just, you don't want it all in one go. As with all good Fiats, we can throw this car around quite a bit, and it doesn't really seem to put up much of a fuss. I can really give it some beans around this roundabout, and I don't feel like I'm going to lose confidence at any point. It grips well, it doesn't lean too much. You can put your foot down, and once the turbo's spooled up, it certainly wants to go some. No problems at all. So while most cars are rated on their 0 to 60 time, which is all very impressive, all very nice, one of the key times that I tend to look for at least is the 50 to 70 time. When you're on a dual carriageway and you want to overtake a lorry, you've been stuck behind it for a few minutes now and there's traffic bearing down on you, 0 to 60 isn't really going to help you. The 50 to 70 time, however, is going to help you. So we're going to give it a go now. Let's do our 50 to 70. I'm currently in 4th gear. Now I know that there's a bit of an issue with the turbo spooling up on this, so I'm going to put it into 3rd gear for this at 50 miles an hour. It sounds a bit extreme, but we'll give it a go. So 50 miles an hour, 3rd gear, foot down, 60, 4th gear, 70. So that wasn't too bad, but I would like it to be a bit quicker. Fiat's always typically prided itself on making very small, nippy, sporty town cars, and this is really no exception, with perhaps an issue with the turbos on the diesel engines. But if you do want something sportier, you'd probably end up going for a petrol engine anyway, and perhaps a higher trim level. But all in all, this does feel like a sporty little car. You can throw it around a little bit and still have a bit of fun. Possibly more fun with the petrol though. Now, a point I really do like about this car, and I don't think about this kind of thing very often, is the performance on the brakes. This car, like most Grande Puntos, will have disc brakes on the front and drums on the rear. But in this case, I was astounded as to how quickly the car will stop. I'm doing 30 now, and it's a pretty aggressive stop. And I can't remember the last time I drove a car of this size with drum brakes on the back that would stop so aggressively. All in all, the Grande Punto is quite a comfortable car. The driving position is a little bit as you'd expect from an Italian car. Very long arms and very short legs is what's expected. I'm neither of those. I'm 6'2", and I've got the seat most of the way back here, and I do feel like I'm still stretching for the wheel despite using the full reach of the wheel. For a car of this price bracket and this size, the comfort in terms of ride quality is actually not bad at all. This one is running on 15-inch alloy wheels, so the tyres are a bit bigger than you'd get on some other models, and that does nicely cushion the ride. It's not crashing about, it's quite a gentle ride, it's not too noisy. All in all, I feel I could probably do a distance in this. The only thing I would say is, if you can, try to get a good 15-20 minute drive if you'd go for a test drive, and just throw it around the corners a little bit. Something I find with these seats is they're a little bit too hard and they don't particularly hug you very much, and I do find that I'm moving around quite a lot when you go around a corner quickly. Something that seems to be common with a lot of modern cars these days, especially Fiat, is the visibility when you're driving around, and this is no exception at all. From the driver's position driving around, I'm immediately noticing the large A-pillars in front of me, which are greatly restricting my visibility, and at junctions it's making it hard work to pull out. When I first drove the car on a test drive, I did almost pull in front of someone because I just couldn't see them. And rear visibility is no exception. From the rear view mirror I can see a good amount out of the window, but when I look over my shoulder for reversing, again you've got these large pillars at the back and it can hinder your visibility when, say, reversing. The one plus point, however, is that the back of the car is incredibly flat, so I know that when I look at that rear window I'm definitely at the end of the car, which does make parking quite a lot easier. Talking about visibility, there's one thing that does particularly bug me about this car, and I'm kind of willing to let it go because it's Italian, it's Fiat, and I've come to expect this. The way I've got the wheel adjusted for my height and build, I've actually got the wheel all the way up, but what that's effectively done is it's blocked half the dial, so I can't see the trip computer, nor can I see the bottom of the speedo and rev counter. Now that is a little bit annoying. The layout of the dashboard is pretty much as you'd expect. Everything falls easily to hand. There's nice big chunky dials, nice and easy to use, nothing too interesting there. The steering wheel buttons are quite a nice touch. Well, most cars will have them these days, although the one thing I would say about these, I've got quite big hands, and I do find that the palms of my hands actually tend to rest on the buttons, and once or twice I've pressed buttons unintentionally through gripping the steering wheel. Now, typically with the voice activation systems of old, you find that they can't actually understand what you're saying, but we'll give this a quick go and see if it can understand some basic commands. Help.
The commands available are message reader, Echo Drive, settings, telephone, play, stop, next, previous, or cancel.
Play. Very nice. Stop.
Playback stopped.
So all in all, the Grande Punto is a pretty good used bike. Despite its failings and its flaws, I would still have one myself, but I'd say definitely try to avoid the 1.3 turbo diesel if you can. My personal preference is to go for one of the petrols, probably get better performance. So if you are desperate for fuel economy, then the diesel will probably make more sense for you. Alternative, you are looking for the best of both worlds. If you pick up a sporting model, you can actually have a 1.9 litre turbo diesel, which will give you good performance and good fuel economy to match. Just a note on the petrols, if you don't like sluggish performance on dual carriageways and motorways, probably best to avoid the 1.2 petrol if you are looking at petrols, but the 1.2 itself is actually fine for nipping around town. If you do decide you want a Grande Punto, keep your eyes open and do take your time to have a look around. There's plenty of good used examples, so you can be picky about which one you want. But if you fancy something a little bit newer, then obviously there is the Punto Evo and the new Punto. So that's the Grande Punto. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to comment, like and subscribe. We'll see you soon.